Sometimes when people break up, one person wants to let go and the other person usually doesn't. It's the way it works out, right?
Right.
Let's assume that the defendant also testified that after Mr. Juarez hung up on her the first time, that she called him a second time. Now it's beginning to get a little bit dicier because she won't go away, right?
It's not atypical. It's not unusual.
It may not be atypical, but it's not the first telephone call. It's the second one. It's now becoming, if we're going to start using the word pattern, it's now starting to become a bit of a pattern, right? Because it hasn't happened once, it's happening again, right? It's the start of a pattern, right? It could be.
It's possible.
All right.
But it's also typical for people to make more than one
Whether
call.
it's typical or not, I'm asking whether or not it could be the start of a pattern. That's what I'm asking.
Could be.
And during this second telephone call, assume that the defendant testified that during this second telephone call, she again was able to get a hold of Mr. Juarez. And after Mr. Juarez knew who it was, he again hung up on her. Assume that. In that relationship, assume that they get together. And after they get together, they break up again. And after they break up, Mr. Juarez is staying at his place of residence. Assume that the defendant testified to that. Do you know anything about that?
No.
Assume that the defendant then said, that indicated that even though they were broken up, she was still attempting to contact Mr. Juarez. Assume that. She testified to that.
All right.
Overruled. The jury is directed to recall the testimony previously provided in this trial. You may continue.
And she was doing things in this attempt to contact him. According to her, she was buying things like groceries and leaving them at his doorstep. Are you aware of anything like that?
No.
Assume that that's part of the facts in this case. You previously testified that people who are starting to have this pattern, that's one of the things that they do. They look for excuses to keep contact with the person that has left them, right?
Different situation at the end of a relationship. People oftentimes don't let go right away. But I'd want to see how far it went and
I'm telling you how far it went. That's what the defendant testified to.
All right.
That she left things like groceries at his doorstep.
All right.
For whatever reason. So again, even though the relationship is over, that indicates that there's still, on the part of the defendant, some action to keep contact, doesn't it?
Yes.
And again, if we take into account the 2 calls that were involved, and now this contact, it does seem that there's the beginning of a pattern where the defendant is doing something in a positive fashion to keep the relationship going when the other party is done, right?
Objection, foundation, and timeline as to over what time period this is actually occurring.
Sustained.
Let's say it happened within a year. All right? Will you assume that?
That there's a year of constant contact?
Assume that there's a breakup, there's the calls, they get back together, they break up again, and then there's this contact, leaving things at the door, and that all that happens, let's say, between 6 to 8 months apart. This whole thing. Assume that.
Okay.
And then assume that the defendant told us that they break up again, and that the individual, Bobby Juarez, moved to Medford. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know about Bobby Juarez. I don't know much about Bobby Juarez.
We'll assume that he moved to a place called Medford, Oregon. That was the testimony, correct? And he started to live with an individual by the name of Matthew McCartney. Do you know anything about that?
I do know about that.
Assume that after Mr. Juarez moved to Medford, Oregon, that the defendant, even though they'd broken up and she's living somewhere else, she began...
With regard to the breakup at that point.
Overruled again. The jury is directed to recall the testimony. You may continue.
After the breakup, and Mr. Juarez is in Medford, Oregon, living with Matthew McCartney, she testified that she then started going there on weekends. Assume that. doesn't that begin to show a pattern of, number one, telephone calls, then contact at the door, and then after the individual, and they're broken up, moves away, she's still trying to keep contact. Doesn't that, and this is over a period of many months, isn't that the beginnings of a pattern?
Objection, Judge. Mischaracterizing Ms. Arias' testimony as to when the breakup occurred. They were not broken up at that point when she was traveling. So the hypothetical is not true.
Approach sustained. You may
And
continue.
assume that they were broken up when Mr. Juarez moved to Medford. Assume that, okay? Will you do that as part of the hypothetical? Isn't that a pattern developing here on the part of the defendant? A jealous sort of pattern where Mr. Juarez and her are broken up. She's making telephone calls. And after making telephone calls, she then starts bringing him stuff over to his house. And then after he moves away, she goes to the area where he has moved to. Assume that. Wouldn't that be the beginning of a pattern?
But they're not broken up.
No, I just said they were.
But that's the hypothetical.
Yes.
The hypothetical, because in reality they're not.
You
Correct?
believe that they're not, but let's assume that hypothetically speaking, they are broken up.
Would that be the beginning of a pattern?
Yes.
It could be the beginning of a pattern.
Let's talk about Matthew McCartney. You're familiar with the relationship involving the defendant and Mr. McCartney, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, the defendant sort of went from Mr. Juarez and started dating Mr. McCartney, right?
Correct.
And there came a point when they started dating that, for whatever reason, there was going to be a breakup, right?
Correct.
And it was the defendant who refused to accept the breakup, correct?
She had a hard time with the breakup.
In other words, he wanted to break up and she did not, right?
Correct.
And when they were going through this process, he believed that they were already broken up, right?
Objection made.
He, at some
Sustained.
point, they broke up at some point, didn't they?
Yes.
And after they broke up, the defendant then confronted somebody by the name of Bianca, correct?
Correct.
Objection is states her testimony after the breakup.
Overruled.
And I don't think it was a confrontation.
I didn't say the confrontation, but it's after the breakup that Ms. Arias, according to you, goes and talks to Bianca, right?
Objection is characterizing the testimony.
I'm not talking about testimony, I'm talking about her understanding it.
Overruled.
Right?
I'm not sure if they were broken up or not. I only know that she went and talked to Bianca. She talked to Bianca about the breakup. Yeah, I guess it was a breakup. She went to talk about, she said it was cheating, and she went to talk to Bianca about the cheating.
Do you remember writing about this in your notes?
I'm sure that I did.
And isn't it true that your notes indicate that,
Objection reading something that's not marked.
Overruled.
isn't it true that your notes indicate that they had already broken up when this talk between the defendant and Bianca took place?
I need to see my notes.
Okay. Take a look at Exhibit 613.
All right.
And isn't it true that there was this breakup, correct, between her and Mr. McCartney, correct? Yes or
Yes.
no? And isn't it true that it was after this breakup that there was this conversation between the defendant and Bianca, correct?
Correct.
Isn't that part of a pattern of jealous behavior in confronting somebody?
It didn't sound like a confrontation either by Mr. McCartney or Miss Arias. It sounded like she went and had a talk with her, maybe clarified, I don't know. But I didn't get the jealous behavior. I got the going to talk to someone. It wasn't, if it was real jealous, it seems like it would have been more confrontational.
So,
It's not described that way.
Mr. McCartney wasn't present for that one, was he?
No, but he said it wasn't.
Right. And it was based on what the defendant told him, right?
I would suspect he talked to Bianca as well.
Pardon?
I would suspect he talked to his own girlfriend about it.
Again, now you're assuming because it's to the benefit of the defendant that Mr. McCartney spoke to Bianca. You don't know that, do you?
I know that Mr. McCartney said that it wasn't an adversarial situation.
Right. And the issue with that is he wasn't present, correct?
No, he wasn't.
Any information he would have received would have come either from the defendant or perhaps from Bianca, if he spoke with Bianca, correct?
Correct.
So anything that he knows secondhand, correct?
Correct.
And after this confrontation, isn't it true that the defendant went at some point, shortly after that, and slept in Mr. McCartney's bed without his permission?
Yes.
Again, isn't that, given in light of what happened with Mr. Juarez, and in light of what's happening here with Mr. McCartney, doesn't that suggest to you a pattern of jealousy?
It suggests a pattern of having a very difficult time letting go. But she's not controlling anyone with her jealousy. She's not controlling them.
Okay, let me talk to you about another. Take a look at this exhibit, 614. You recognize it?
Yes, the continuum.
And it's the same one that we talked about before, right?
Yes.
The only difference is that this one is clearer, correct?
Clearer?
In other words, the letters are clear.
There aren't any exacerbating factors on it.
There's no what?
There's no exacerbating factors on
Right.
it.
Other than that, and that's the other change, but other than that, it's just a clear presentation of the items in the up and down fashion, right?
Judge May, she had the original exhibit to compare. Yes.
Judge, I don't want her to compare to the original. I'm just saying, isn't this something that that she's familiar with?
All right, overruled.
Is this something you're familiar with and you put together, correct?
Yes, it's incomplete.
And that's fine, it's incomplete, but this is something you put together, correct?
Yes.
All right. Move for the admission of Exhibit 614.
Judge, may we approach?
614 is admitted.
Now, you indicated that was with regard to what we've been talking about, the defendant, that was not necessarily a pattern of jealousy, correct?
Right.
Actually, what we're really talking about is that's a pattern of stalking, isn't it?
No, it isn't.
Well, she's gone and contacted Bobby Juarez on the telephone 2 times after the breakup, right?
She has.
And she's left things at his door after they've broken up, correct?
Stalking implies fear.
Yes or no?
Stalking implies
Yes
fear.
or no?
Incorrect.
She's clearly-
Stalking is about fear.
Yes, what's the objection?
The objection is she clearly cannot answer the question with a yes or no answer.
All right, overruled. Restate your question.
Isn't it true that she, with regard to Mr. Juarez, she left things at his doorstep, correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true that with regard to Mr. McCartney, one of the things that she did is that she went and spoke to the person that she believed that he was seeing, correct?
Correct.
And then she slept in his bed, right?
She did.
And with regard to Mr. Alexander, isn't it true that one of the things that you know with regard to the Reagan-Hausling instant messaging was that Mr. Alexander was exceedingly afraid because of the defendant's stalking behavior?
Overruled. You may.
I don't know that he's exceedingly afraid. I don't get.
Judge, may I then ask her well, I think we'll need to approach it.
Yes, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take the evening recess. During the break, did you have an opportunity to look at your schedules for the dates I indicated earlier? Let's start with this Friday, April 12th, from 9:30 to 12:30. Is there anyone who could not be here from 9:30 to 12:30 this Friday? All right, thank you. Please plan to be here. For April 26th, from 9 to 4, is there anyone who could not be here? Thank you. Please plan to be here. Now, May 3rd, it appears we may not need that date, but is there anyone who has a problem with that date? Excuse me. All right, please keep that on your calendar as well. All right, please remember the admonition. Have a nice evening tomorrow morning, 9:30.